The notification did not even make a sound. It just lit up my phone screen ghostly white against the gray Seattle twilight outside my penthouse window. I was standing 40 floors above the city watching the rain slick the shipping docks below. My docks. My ships. My $16 billion empire of steel and logistics. And there it was. A text from my father, Richard. Not a greeting, not a question. Just a screenshot of a bank transfer receipt with my name clearly printed on it, followed by a message that made the air in the room drop 10 degrees. I know what you did. You are stealing from the trust to fund your little hobby. I am freezing your access and calling the police. Do not bother coming home. I stared at the words. The irony was not just rich. It was sharp enough to cut glass. He thought I stole the money I had deposited myself. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I did not cry. I did not panic. I did not throw my phone across the room. I just stared at the gray horizon of the Puget Sound, feeling a cold metallic resolve settle in my chest. It was the same feeling I got before acquiring a competitor. Clinical. Detached. And absolutely lethal. I picked up my secure line and dialed. Mr. Sterling, my senior wealth manager, answered on the second ring. Alexandra, he said, his voice sharp. He knew I did not call the secure line for pleasantries. Dad thinks I am embezzling the allowance I give him, I said. My voice was steady, devoid of any tremor. He is threatening to call the police. Sterling paused. He realizes the account is in your name as the primary benefactor, correct? Evidently not, I replied. Let us correct that assumption. Protocol Omega. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Protocol Omega was not a strategy. It was a nuclear option. It meant full disclosure. Total transparency. No more shielding them from the reality of who paid for their country club memberships and their antique acquisitions. Are you sure? Sterling asked. Kill the auto transfers, I commanded. Freeze the antique acquisition fund. And prepare the unredacted audit. The one that shows where every single cent of that $28 million actually came from, understood, Sterling said. I will have the courier there within the hour. I hung up and walked to the window. Below me, a massive cargo ship, one of mine, the Titan, was leaving the harbor bound for Singapore. It was a leviathan of industry moving thousands of tons of goods across the globe. And my father thought I was stealing his pocket change to fund a hobby. The absurdity was almost funny. Almost. But I was not laughing. I was calculating. The lifeline was cut. Now we would see how long they could tread water. While the legal team prepared the documents that would dismantle my family's reality, I sat in my Eames chair and let myself remember the why. Why had I hidden a $16 billion empire for 5 years? It was not shame. It was not fear of their greed, though that would have been valid. It was something far more tragic. I remembered a dinner party 3 years ago. Richard sat at the head of the table, swirling a glass of vintage Bordeaux that I had secretly paid for. He was holding court, bragging to his friends about his legacy in the antique business. It is about having an eye for value, he had boomed, his face flushed with pride. You have to know what something is truly worth. I had sat there silent, knowing his business had hemorrhaged cash for a decade. I knew because I was the one covering the losses. Every month my algorithm siphoned funds into his accounts under the guise of anonymous sales. I watched him preen his entire identity wrapped up in being the provider, the patriarch, the man who knew value. And I realized then that he did not know value at all. He only knew price tags, but that was not the point. The point was his fragility. Richard's masculinity was a house of cards built on the foundation of being the breadwinner. If I revealed that I, the daughter he dismissed as artsy and distracted, was actually a titan of industry, I would not just be proving him wrong, I would be destroying him. I would be taking away the one thing he valued more than money. His sense of self. It is a psychological trap called status incongruence. When a subordinate, in this case a daughter, surpasses the dominant figure in status, it creates a cognitive dissonance that often results in aggression. I knew that the moment I outshone him, he would not applaud. He would attack. So I trapped myself in silence. I built a golden cage of deception, not to hide my success, but to protect his ego. My silence was not a lie. It was a form of tragic love. But looking at that text message accusing me of theft, I realized that love had been a bad investment. He did not want a daughter. He wanted an audience. And the show was over. The silence from my end drove them mad. It started within 20 minutes of the wire transfer failing. Tyler, my brother, was the first to break. Tyler was a 25-year-old law student who drove a Porsche I had paid for and lived in a condo I owned through a shell company. He left a voicemail that I listened to on speaker, my face blank. Alexandra, pick up the phone. Dad is losing his mind. The antique auction house just declined his credit. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? You need to fix this. Whatever weird game you are playing with the trust, stop it. You are being selfish, delusional, and frankly a parasite. Call me back, or I am suing you for emotional distress caused to Dad. I deleted the voicemail without responding. Next came the email from my mother, Patricia. Subject line, family reputation. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Alexandra, your father is devastated. He believes you have lost your way. We have a standing in this community, and having a daughter accused of financial impropriety is a stain on the lineage. Please just return what you took, and we can handle this quietly. We will not even press charges if you apologize tonight. They were not just cutting me off. They were actively trying to destroy my character to save their own skins. They were circling the wagons, unaware they were throwing stones at a tank. I did not feel hurt. I felt confirmed. I pulled up the financial breakdown on my tablet. It was a study in contrast. My father measured wealth in loud wealth. Country club memberships. The vintage Jaguar in the driveway. The antique collection that nobody actually wanted to buy. It was wealth that screamed for attention because it was terrified of being ignored. It was fragile. One missed payment, one declined credit card, and the illusion shattered. My wealth was different. It was quiet power. It was the infrastructure of the modern world. It was shipping lanes in the South China Sea. It was AI algorithms that predicted supply chain disruptions before they happened. It was the kind of power that did not need to scream because it whispered in the ears of governments. My family was living in a Potemkin village. A facade of status with nothing behind it but rotting timber and my money. And I was the one holding the sledgehammer. They thought they were negotiating with a wayward child. They had no idea they were declaring war on the landlord of their entire reality. I forwarded the voicemails and emails to Mr. Sterling with a 2-word note attached. Proceed. Unredacted. If they wanted a war about money, I would give them a lesson in economics. The next morning, I did not go to the family estate to beg for forgiveness. I went to the boardroom of Titan Logistics AI. The room was a fortress of glass and steel suspended 40 stories above the city. My chief financial officer Elias and my general counsel Sarah were already waiting. On the screen behind them was a detailed schematic of my family's financial existence. It was red. All red. Status report, I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. Elias tapped the screen. It is worse than we thought, Alexandra. Your father has not made a legitimate profit in the antique business since 2008. He has been rolling over high-interest loans to pay for inventory that does not sell. The only thing keeping him solvent was your monthly injection of $40,000 disguised as anonymous sales. Without that, he is insolvent within 30 days. I looked at the numbers. They were not just bad business, they were delusional. And the lifestyle, I asked? Sarah chimed in, heavily leveraged. The country club dues are on a credit line. The cars are leased. Tyler's law school tuition was paid by a grant from the foundation, which, as you know, is you. They are burning through cash at a rate of $60,000 a month with zero revenue. They are not just broke, Alexandra. They are drowning, and you are the oxygen tank. I stared at the data. For years, I had authorized these payments automatically, never looking too closely at the bleed. I had viewed it as the cost of keeping the peace. Now I viewed it as the cost of their arrogance. They had spent 5 years lecturing me on ambition while I was quietly subsidizing their failure. They called me a hobbyist while I built an empire that could buy their entire neighborhood. Authorize the nuclear option, I said. The room went quiet. Sarah looked at me over her glasses. You mean full transparency? Yes. No more shell companies. No more anonymous grants. I want a full unredacted audit of every dollar I have given them sent to my father's lawyer, his accountant, and him. Let them see the source. Let them see the dates. Let them see that the hand they bit was the only one feeding them. Elias nodded, tapping a command on his tablet. Done. The courier is en route. The audit will be on your father's desk within the hour. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the cranes moving containers in the distance. Each one of those containers held more value than my father's entire life's work. He wanted to talk about theft. He wanted to talk about worth? Fine. I was about to show him the difference between a net worth and a network. I turned back to my team. And get the jet ready. I have a feeling I will need to make a personal appearance to accept their surrender. Just as I was about to close the file, Mr. Sterling raised a hand. Wait, Alexandra. There is one more thing. He slid a thin blue folder across the mahogany table. It looked innocuous, but in my world the thinnest folders often contained the heaviest ammunition. I opened it. It was a property lien document. Dated 6 months ago. What is this? I asked, scanning the legalese. Sterling leaned back, his expression grim. 6 months ago, your father tried to leverage the family estate. He went to a private lender, the kind that charges usury rates and breaks kneecaps if you miss a payment. He needed $250,000 to cover a gambling debt he had disguised as an antique acquisition. The bank had already rejected him because on paper he is insolvent. So he went to the sharks. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He gambled the house, my mother's house, the house I grew up in. The only asset they had left that was not leased or leveraged. And you stopped him, I asked. Not exactly, Sterling said. Your algorithm flagged the distress signal the moment his credit hit the subprime market. We could not stop him from taking the loan without revealing your identity. So we did the next best thing. We became the lender. I looked closer at the document. The shell company listed as the creditor was one of mine, Aegis Holdings. I remembered authorizing a high-risk asset purchase 6 months ago, buried in a stack of routine approvals. I had bought my father's debt. I had paid off the sharks and taken the note myself. Do you realize what this means? Sterling asked quietly. Technically, Richard defaulted on the loan terms 3 months ago. He stopped paying because he assumed the anonymous lender you was too disorganized to notice. He was banking on incompetence. Instead, he walked into a trap. I stared at the deed attached to the lien. The twist was not just that I funded their lifestyle. It was that Richard had already lost the house. He was living there on borrowed time, and the landlord was the daughter he had just disowned. This changed everything. It shifted the narrative from a story of betrayal to one of absolute terrifying justice. This is the karma of the seed sower. When you plant seeds of deception, you do not just harvest lies. You harvest your own obsolescence. By secretly buying that debt, I had not just saved them from eviction. I had secured total control. My generosity was not a gift. It was a checkmate. I had unknowingly put a collar around the neck of the man who thought he was the master of the house. Pack this too, I said, closing the folder. My father wants to talk about ownership. He wants to talk about what is his and what is mine. I think it is time we had that conversation. But we will not be having it in his study. We will be having it in my property. The drive to the family estate took 40 minutes. I spent the time reviewing the unredacted audit, memorizing the dates and the sums. When my black SUV pulled into the driveway, I saw the flashing lights. Richard had actually done it. He had called the police. 2 squad cars were parked on the gravel. My father stood on the porch looking triumphant, with Tyler flanking him like a nervous squire. My mother, Patricia, hovered in the doorway, clutching a handkerchief. They looked like a tableau of Victorian melodrama. I stepped out of the car, followed immediately by Mr. Sterling and 2 of my security detail. Richard pointed a shaking finger at me. There she is, officers. That is the woman. She embezzled millions from my family trust. I want her arrested immediately. A police officer, a sergeant with a tired face, stepped forward. Ma'am, we have received a complaint regarding financial theft. We need to ask you some questions. I did not look at the officer. I looked at Richard. He was smiling. It was a cruel, brittle smile. The smile of a man who thought he had finally put the uppity subordinate back in her place. I am happy to answer any questions, Sergeant, I said, my voice calm, carrying across the lawn. But first, I think my father should see this. Sterling stepped forward and handed Richard the thick binder. The unredacted audit. Richard took it, sneering. What is this? More lies. Open it, Dad. Look at the source of funds column. He flipped the cover open. He read the first line, then the second. His face went from red to a pale, sickly gray. Every single deposit, every monthly injection of $40,000, every tuition payment for Tyler, every medical bill for Mom. They all had one origin name listed next to them. Alexandra Vasquez. Not the trust. Not anonymous. Me. I did not steal from the trust, Dad, I said, stepping onto the first step of the porch. I am the trust. Tyler grabbed the binder from him, reading it frantically. This cannot be right. You are a shipping clerk. You work in a warehouse. I own the warehouse, Tyler. I own the ships. I own the company that moves the goods. I own the algorithm that tracks them. And as of 6 months ago, I signaled Sterling again. He handed me the blue folder. I walked up the remaining steps until I was standing eye to level with my father. He was trembling now, the binder slipping from his hands. As of 6 months ago, when you tried to mortgage this house to pay off a gambling debt, I own this too. I dropped the deed onto the welcome mat. It landed with a soft thud that sounded like a gavel. I bought the note, Dad. You defaulted 3 months ago. I did not come here to get arrested for stealing your money. I came here to inspect my property. The silence was absolute. The police officer looked at the documents, then at me, then at the sputtering patriarch. Ma'am, the officer said, his tone completely different now. Respectful, deferential. Is this your residence? It is my property, Sergeant, I said. These people are tenants, and we are having a landlord-tenant dispute. I do not believe police presence is necessary unless they refuse to comply with the audit. The officer tipped his cap. Understood, Miss Vasquez. We will be going then. Call us if you need anything. They got in their cars and left. My family stood in the wreckage of their reality. Richard slumped against the doorframe, the air rushing out of him as if he had been punctured. He looked small. He looked old. He looked like what he was. A man who had spent his life standing on a pedestal I had built for him, only to realize he was standing on a trapdoor. The living room was quiet. It was the kind of silence that follows a bomb blast, where the ringing in your ears is the only sound. Tyler was sitting on the sofa, his head in his hands, muttering about his law degree and how this would look. Patricia was weeping softly, but she would not look at me. Richard sat in his leather armchair, the throne from which he had lectured me about financial responsibility for a decade. He was staring at the deed on the coffee table as if it were a venomous snake. I did not sit. I stood by the fireplace looking at them. I felt a strange absence of anger. The anger had burned off, leaving only clarity. Here are the terms, I said. My voice did not echo. It absorbed the room. You can stay. I am not going to evict my parents. But the allowance is gone. The antique business will be audited by my team starting tomorrow. If it is not viable, it will be liquidated. Tyler, your tuition is paid through this semester. After that, you are on your own. Get a job. Get a loan. I do not care. But the scholarship is closed. But how will we live? Patricia whispered. You will live like everyone else, Mom. You will live within your means, and you will live here by my grace, not your right. Richard looked up. His eyes were wet, red-rimmed. Why, he croaked. Why did you let me believe I was successful? Why humiliate me like this? I did not humiliate you, Dad. You did that yourself when you called the police on the person keeping you alive. I hid the truth, because I loved you enough to protect your ego. I thought if you felt big, you would be happy. But you were not happy. You were just arrogant. And I realize today that I cannot buy your happiness. And I am done paying for your arrogance. I turned to leave. Mr. Sterling opened the door for me. I walked out of the house I owned, past the cars I had paid for, leaving behind the family I had outgrown. I returned to my penthouse as the sun was setting over the Pacific. The rain had stopped leaving, the city washed clean, glittering like a circuit board. I poured a glass of water and stood by the window. I looked down at the port, watching the cranes load containers onto a ship bound for Singapore. The Titan, my ship. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to the contact group labeled Family Emergency. I hit delete. The names vanished. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a weight I had carried for 5 years. It was the weight of being the invisible daughter, the shadow benefactor. That person was gone. I was no longer hiding. I was Alexandra Vasquez. I was the Titan. My phone buzzed. It was a business call from my team in Tokyo. A merger opportunity. A billion-dollar question. I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, the smile reached my eyes. "This is Alexandra," I answered. "Let's talk business."